Caroline, you strongly believe that Brexit will be bad for women.
Yeah, I have always been against Brexit on the basis that I think it will be bad for Britain. But women, mainly because women tend to be the ones who are most economically precarious. They dominate in precarious jobs, in short-term and part-time contracts. And also the EU has been really, really important for strengthening working rights, particularly those that women depend on. For example, maternity leave and, equal rights for part-time workers and that kind of thing. And Boris Johnson has removed the commitment that was in the original Brexit withdrawal bill to ensure that workers' rights were not rolled back. And there's also been that kind of language about bureaucracy and red tape, which, several of the ministers who were pro-Brexit are already on record as saying involved things like the Pregnant Workers Directive, which is one of the things that means you can't get fired if you are pregnant or that you have a right to return to the same job.
This sounds worrying, James.
Well, it is if you wrap it up like that. But the thing is that this is just a lot of nonsense. Sorry, but it is. Look, the thing is that there will be some. There will be some. Look, there will be some people who, of course, benefit from Brexit. There's somebody who won't be affected at all, and there'll be some people who will be worse off. We don't know how it's going to manifest. So my view on this is that just to say, it's going to be bad for women, it's just rubbish.
I think historically that's the way these kinds of things have played out. And we as a country have a record of fighting against progressive workers' rights bills that the EU has been trying to implement. So, for example, for years the EU was trying to improve maternity leave, and it's mainly because of Britain that they didn't get to implement it. Eventually they abandoned the bill.
But isn't that how democracy works?
What do you mean is that how democracy works?
We vote. The whole point about the EU is we now decide if we want these things. And if we don't want them,
I'm not saying
that's it.
We shouldn't have Brexit. That's not what I'm saying. But I am arguing that we need to have an equality assessment of what the bill is and how this is going to go forward, because there is very good reason to be concerned that these kinds of workers' rights are going to be rolled back, and if they are, that will have a serious negative impact on women.
Selma.
Yeah, and I think the point here, to counteract what you said, James, is historically, when there is big legislative change or big policy change, because the world has structurally been built by men for men, women are then disregarded, not on purpose. I don't think anyone's going to sit there in Parliament and go, let's take back equal pay for women because we don't want it. But people will not think about it. Women aren't in decision-making roles as much as men. They're not in those spaces. They're not always in their conversations. And natural biases that we all have, which is the whole entire point of Caroline's book, is that we naturally ignore them and they aren't taken into account. And so all these huge changes are going to happen.
You're having fun. Yeah, he's having fun today, isn't he? Look at this.
Are you sweating yet?
No, not yet, because it's just rubbish. Here's the point, is if we decide as a society to go down a particular route and to ignore what we have done in terms of progressing the way that we deal with workers' rights or the way that we recognise whether it's race and religion and sex and all these things that we have to take into account, and unless we adapt as a society, then, yeah, OK, it could be worse. But I would hope that we've learnt some of these lessons over this period of time and can just remove some of this woke nonsense that gets in the way, and we start to use statistics in the most appalling manner that the law of average suddenly confects into every single decision that we take. And then it means that you don't take any good decisions,
James,
and you end up with rubbish.
Do you think that in our society now, in policy, government, structurally, men and women have the same opportunities and equal rights?
I think that if you start...
That's a yes or no answer.
It's not a yes or no answer. It's not, because the point is that if you group all men as one group and all women as another group, then you ignore their race, their orientation, their age, and all those other things. I'm sorry, you make rubbish decisions.
Well,
awful decisions.
Go on, Caroline. For that. What we're talking about is the way that, if you do look at historically and today, the way that governments around the world approach policy, they don't account for how things may impact men or women differently. And there's all sorts of really interesting examples of that, of how we essentially waste resources, we waste money, and we waste time because we create policy sort of on what we've done before, on sort of common sense, and not actually on the data. What you're talking about, we should be using statistics, absolutely, but the point is we aren't gathering the data. For example, the vast majority of data sets are massively dominated by data collected on men.
Now, where I agree with you is that we've got a real problem.
Car crashes and the medical treatment and misdiagnosis.
And those are fantastic points. And I agree with them.
Policy, where are we going to allocate resources? Where are we going to allocate our spending? If there's an economic tightening, the government might decide to invest. Where are they going to put that investment, and how will it impact on women versus men?
Because this whole thing was an economic argument about we'll be better off or worse off or whatever. What if we're better off? Won't everyone then be better off? And then women who you're concerned about will also be better off.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that because, a country is better off, that everyone in that country will be better off. I mean, that's one of the trends we've seen over the past few decades, that countries have been getting richer and inequality has been widening, and the richness has been congregating around the top 1%, the top 5%, whatever you choose to look at. So I don't think you can take that as a given.
And I find, like, in these arguments, when you say that, you're like, well, surely if we're all better off, then women are going to be better off. And it's kind of labouring under the misconception that everyone is just going to pay attention to the women and give them their rights. Like, how long did it take England to give women, some women, the vote? People didn't just wake up and go, let's do the right thing and do right by all the women. They just don't do it.
Storm, you got any comments on this yet?
I've got a call, so we'll speak to Michael from Kent, who says Brexit will affect everyone, not just women.
So, what, for good or for bad, Michael?
For whatever. I think no one knows for certain what's going to happen. My mother, for example, spent her working career working for heads of companies. Yeah. She was respected and did a good job. As a member of St John Ambulance, she joined St John Ambulance primarily because my younger sister couldn't join in Dover when she'd been a member in Tunbridge because of the age group. And the reason was they didn't have enough people to do the job. She qualified and set up a younger generation.
Right.
It's a question of attitude. Get on and do it.
OK, so your thought is, just to be clear, that the worries that, let's say, Caroline has here, in the end, people can change their own circumstances by just fighting for it. Is that right?
Yes, get up and do it.
Caroline.
That's just not really what we're talking about. We're talking about government policy, which has got nothing to do with individuals getting up and doing anything. And all the research shows that everywhere you care to look, from the medical world to politics to, disaster relief, we all have this bias. If I say person, 8 out of 10 of you will be picturing a man, and that is just a bias that we all share, including me. I bet when you heard Jeremy talking about a plumber, you were picturing a man. That's just totally normal. There's nothing wrong with that. No, hang on a minute. Hang on.
Michael's going to come back in.
I'm not talking about people being bad people, right? I'm talking about a bias. And historically, we have had this bias that the average man represents the average human. And the result of that bias is that we don't have enough data on women to be able to design cars, to design medication, and to design government policy in such a way that it will affect men.
So when there's a shift, James, I'm getting this argument now, I understand it. When there's a shift, always it's the blokes who get the go away with the cream.
I understand the argument. I don't necessarily agree with the translation, if you like, of the data that you're putting. It's very compelling, and I understand that. But if you're trying to change a society, in a sense, to me, there's a bit of an eradication of history going on. Instead of saying we have to deal with history and therefore we have to move people's sensibilities and we have to move their minds forward. And that takes a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to do that, I think, for example, the next generation are going to be far better than either this current one or the one before about how we treat each other and how we work together. Whether or not you can identify, and this is the danger, when you start to put everybody into very large groups and say, this group, yes, that group, no, then I'm afraid you end up with the margins, and the margins normally get ignored.
I don't understand what part of the data that Caroline's talking about you don't agree with.
But the point is that we don't have the data. That's the thing that I'm concerned about, is that governments are not making evidence-based decisions because we haven't been collecting the data.
Because evidence-based decision-making is just awful.
But you can't.
Seriously?
You can't take individuals on a single basis and then government policy is going to be made.
I'll tell you why it's awful.
Quickly, James,
I'll tell you why it's awful. It's awful because people are using past data sets to look into the future. No one can look into the future. We've made the mistake of giving experts this wonderful view that they can see into the future because they got the data set in the past, and it's rubbish.
All right.
Exactly. But also, I'm not talking about the future. I'm talking about now. We know how men and women are travelling differently now, how they are working differently, and that we haven't collected enough data to be able to administer resources to account for that.
Got to stop there.